Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining Open for Business, How the Current Environment Has Impacted Consumer Buying Behavior with Brad Santanna, Head of E-commerce Sales at the Hershey Company. As a reminder, if you have any questions during the conversation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Here's your host, Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Thanks so much, Drew, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for Open for Business. I'm very excited to welcome Brad Santanna. Coresight is a great piece of research today on 5 trends facing apparel sourcing on our website. And just to remind you, in this environment, we are really looking at topics that are current today, but impacting tomorrow. And this continues to be one of them, this conversation that we're about to have with Brad. So we really want to thank him for joining us. Brad is the head of e-commerce sales at the Hershey Company, where he oversees online sales and retailer media strategy to seamlessly meet consumer needs when, where, and how they interact with the Hershey brands. Brad has almost 20 years of experience at Hershey, and it spans sales, marketing, shopper marketing, category management, and e-commerce across multiple channels and retailers. So we're truly honored to have you here today, Brad. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So as I said in the intro, you've been at Hershey's for almost 20 years. I know this is a big question, but what changes have you seen in the retailer and supplier relationships from a CPG perspective?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me that I've been in the industry for so long. There's been quite a bit that's changed over the past 20 years. So if you think about strong, collaborative partnerships, they're really the foundation to those great supplier-customer partnerships and relationships. But I would say, if I think about back to my time almost at the beginning of the 2000s here. So again, yes, thank you for reminding me how long I've been here. But the fact is that, it was more relationship based. If you think about the evolution a couple years later, it was a little bit more fact and insight based. And now in today's environment, it's really more solution oriented or solution based. So, today as a business leader, you got to start really thinking more holistically about the entire landscape of business. You've got, supply chain challenges. You've got price pack trade architecture elements. You have, retailers that are now some of the largest media conglomerates in the industry. So as a leader, to be, kind of one-dimensional or not even think about bringing in some of those more collaborative internal partners to have those conversations in a holistic fashion could limit you. And with, resources becoming more limited and finite, leveraging your entire toolbox to elevate those relationships is very critical.
Brad, you talked about this idea of the, kind of right now we're having more conversations around solutions. What kinds of solutions are, those whom you're speaking to looking for?
So, I think in the short term here, just kind of understanding the consumer sentiment and behavior is a big one. So you're seeing a lot of different categories respond and interact differently. Certainly grocery has been a big one that's had a pretty seismic shift when you think about it. People have a very staple need. They're having to figure out how to fulfill those groceries and more importantly, find someone who's open for business and has the capacity to fulfill that need. And so I think a lot of that is just trying to understand like what are the behaviors and things that are happening in shopping. So my apologies, my wife works from home. She's getting a phone call. If you hear that in the background, hopefully she'll pick that up very quickly. But there's some other categories that you're seeing kind of in the decline just based on consumer behavior, and some of those industries and those companies are having to understand what that looks like and react differently. I mean, imagine being in the home equipment and exercise business only a few short months ago, and then all of a sudden gyms close, and then you have this onset of demand and you're having to try to figure out, what does my ongoing demand look like? Is this sustainable? Are there new trends in exercise and things that I need to be keeping abreast of to ensure that I'm on the forefront of what happens next? So all over the place, you're seeing consumers make different decisions. And I think within the Hershey Company, we do a pretty good job of making sure that we not only focus on our category, but even elevate past that to provide that level of expertise and insight to our customers.
And when you think about the retailer media strategy, how, kind of where were we at the beginning of the year, kind of where are we now, and where do you see that going? Because there's been so much change there. And I think that the demands continue to shift as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the evolution of media, historically television and print, many years ago, of course, were the biggest areas you'd focus in on. Over the past couple of years, social has really kind of stepped in. And now you're getting into this place where not only retailer media is becoming a bigger part, but even social is, finding unique ways to get, closer in those relationships with the shopper and the consumer. So if you think about where things are moving here, even within social, but more so retailer media, having a chance to capture those shoppers who are in that state of buying and that point of purchase, right? On television, it's really hard to get someone to act. You're hoping they have that awareness and recall to come back and emulate a behavior that you want later on. But with retailer media, you've got a captured audience that's in a shopping mode that's ready to convert in real time. The challenge is in some cases, some of the retailer media capabilities and even some of the data they provide is a work in progress. So it may not be as robust as some other mediums. And if you think about the full purchase funnel, one of the things that we're continuing evaluating in the Hershey company is, rather than separate budgets and looking at it maybe disparately, how are you thinking about the full funnel of that shopper journey from awareness to consideration to conversion? What are those right KPIs you need to look at to ensure that we're optimizing the media mix appropriately? And then how do you plan that back, right? So as a company that plays in confection that's got 99% household penetration, one interesting fact is it actually has slightly greater household penetration than toilet paper, which might be scary to some folks, but it's bought and purchased everywhere. So you have to be very targeted in terms of how you're thinking about spending your media model, because you can reach shoppers in a lot of different areas. So how do you do it most efficiently and effectively? And because of the evolution of what's happening here, we have to be a lot more mindful of that as new media channels open up.
Have you, as you've obviously spent a lot of time on this topic, and I would say that we at Coresight are also having many, kind of conversations around new media. What are you seeing in terms of, different genres or different ways to engage the consumer, and what's most effective right now?
Yeah, again, it's a little bit of a work in progress. I think in this environment, you're doing a lot of testing and learning. So as I mentioned, especially in the retailer media environment, some of them are getting into the game for the first time. They've bought, other companies to help stand these things up. Some of the pieces are being developed in-house. So if you're trying to evaluate your full media model, you're trying to get the consistency in terms of how you're evaluating those things. And the challenge is that not all of them fit neatly in maybe a historical, mixed marketing model avenue. So you may even have to start to evaluate how you even think about mixed media modeling in an effort to kind of synchronize those things through. But some of the retailer media channels that we're looking at have some very interesting capabilities. And, part of that too, very candidly, is us working back through them on their roadmaps to stress what's important to us and share some insights in our own categories and our own consumers' behavior, so they can adapt not only the reporting, but also some of the tools to get there. So I won't say that everyone has it figured out, but I think the one thing that we're appreciative in this environment is the openness to collaborate and learn. And the hope is that that's kind of like that one-to-one collaboration relationship in terms of the solution-based selling I opened up the conversation with, right? It's like, hey, I've got this business challenge or problem, but today your platform isn't giving that to me, and then it's their job to kind of go back and see if this is a broader opportunity for others outside of even just the Hershey company, develop what those things look like. And if you do it right, then you probably have more of our media dollars flowing through your retail media channel.
Makes a lot of sense. And how would you say the conversations with the retailers have changed? What insights are they seeking from you at this point? And how are you able to help them, kind of better understand what's happening at Hershey as well?
Yeah, I think from the Hershey perspective, integrating more of the digital signals and behavior into our broader consumer research plan is definitely something we continue to evolve upon. And we've done a pretty good job of that, especially as COVID has ramped up of thinking about that. I think specifically to the retailer, one of the interesting things is maybe the on-the-fly analogy that I'll try to throw out here to start is like when Amazon first got in the business online, the first thing they ever sold and the only thing they sold were books. And then over time, they've continued to bring on and scale up additional categories. Well, if you were to go back and look at the data from when they first started after they've expanded past books, chances are if you weren't thinking about the data past what the data said, you'd say, oh, well, we only sell books still. Books is our biggest category. We should focus more on books. But obviously that's not the case, and they've figured that out long before I've ever made that statement. Point being is that as these retailers ramp up their capabilities and think about things like media and site merchandising, there's inherent consumer behaviors that you're seeing through the data and through search, et cetera, social that's coming through. But at the same time, we know that there's core consumer behaviors that are happening regardless of the environment that maybe haven't yet found their way into the digital shopping behavior. So I think part of our job is to say, hey, what are you seeing through your data? But at the same time, here's what we know about our core consumer and our core shopper. Let's test and learn some things to see if those behaviors translate online exactly, or maybe need a slight nuance to adapt. A good example that we had a couple Halloweens ago is, one of the #1 things purchased with costumes during Halloween surprise is candy. But today in that environment, it wasn't necessarily thought of or merchandised in a way to incent that behavior and build that basket. So we actually brought those insights to this one particular online retailer. They actually looked at through some of their data. We've devised a plan, and we had an unbelievable engagement in terms of that campaign during that time frame. So I think it's really about challenging, certainly looking at the data and the insight that you can get from the retailer today, but then also thinking about the core essence of what you know about their business and sharing those insights back on more of that collaborative plan.
When you think about collaboration and looking at some of the data from search, do you find that retailers are often coming to you about kind of developing new products or marketing them in a different way, or is that it could be the collaboration, or is that coming from Hershey? But how is that process continuing to evolve?
It's really interesting. It's one of the work streams that we have going on right now in particular. I would say right now, for the most part, and I think they'll get there, but like most things, especially when they accelerate, you kind of realize maybe structurally how you operate. And I think in a lot of these retailer cases, they're still figuring through a little bit of like, hey, there's a buyer merchandising arm of this company, there's a media arm of this company, and there's a site merchandising arm of this company. And by the way, there's also a brick and mortar side in addition to the digital side. So like, how do we think about those things more holistically and connect the dots in a collaborative way, in a solution-based way to drive the whole ecosystem? So I definitely think that's one of the opportunities that we foresee there in terms of kind of driving the future narrative of where it needs to go.
And then as you think about kind of the data that you have already to make decisions, is there kind of more insights that would be helpful, or is it just kind of having conversations with others, or is it kind of looking at the data that you already have in a new way?
I think data is the key to the unlock. So it's a matter of how much data access that we have, and more importantly, you're not just getting data for data's sake, but proving that you're going to actually drive something that's mutually beneficial and actionable. So there are some retailer partners in the e-com space that are better at sharing data than others, and some of them have access to their own portals of data that we can pull our own slices out and have those conversations. Others, it's more about asking those key business questions and seeing if we get to that level of insight with the hopes of getting more broader access. The one interesting thing I think in the case of maybe all categories, specifically confection, if you look at the digital household penetration, let's say grocery, for example, I think to start the year it was somewhere around 3%.
Yep.
I think the total category was about $3.2 trillion. Well, the latest data that I've kind of seen come through some additional research is that projections estimate that it could be 10%, right? So in a category like confection, where it's got 99% household penetration, if I'm not translating that penetration to an online shopper and penetration, all of a sudden I get this gap. So as grocery adoption continues to escalate, if confection penetration doesn't meet or exceed that, then our whole business kind of falls apart. So one of the key metrics that I think is important for any category is my level of penetration and engagement on my core consumer, keeping pace with or rising at the same level. And as people adopt in this environment, I think it's even more important in digital, because we know that once you get a digital shopper, there's a pretty high percentage chance, especially in grocery, that item stays on the list. And that's really what it's all about, is kind of getting to engage in it and keep it on the list. So any means that you can use to push your retail partners to really push on this household penetration metric, I think is really important, because when you're not careful, if you're not clear on how the brick and mortar and digital ecosystems interact, you might be looking at a business and saying, my online business is up 200%, but my total business is down 3%. What is happening? And it's something that doesn't happen like overnight, but it will kind of gradually erode itself over time.
Well, and what we're also saying, right, is that there, in many cases, right, kind of digital and physical have been in kind kind of two, separate parts of the house. As that has become kind of more, as you said, right, it's almost seamless, right? This kind of idea of it's just retail, it's not digital and physical. How is that impacting Hershey in one way or another? And how are you helping, kind of retailers think about that, more holistically?
Yeah, from the internal side, especially with everything going on, let's just say that e-commerce became a lot more important overnight, pretty quickly. But I think it does open up pretty good dialogues, and to our company's credit, some good work streams of thinking about better ways to integrate. So I realized that I didn't answer one of your previous questions fully, but as you mentioned, kind of innovation is one of the key pillars. Today you might do just-in-time research related to consumer insights projects or studies, et cetera, to help understand some of these things. The reality is too, you've got kind of ongoing free-flowing information that's constantly coming through something like search. And if you read the tea leaves in terms of what's happening with search, you can start to unlock some of those emerging consumer behaviors that are starting to pop up, where you can start thinking about that from an innovation perspective. Some of that might lead you to believe that those search, for example, within search, it might influence the way that you position creative with existing core items in terms of how people are using it or thinking about it. But in other means, it might say, hey, there's an unmet need here in this space, and if you look at the data, there might be a lot of glance, use, and engagement on some core products, but in the end, the conversion is really low. So what are the gaps? How does my portfolio, how do my brands play into that? And then how do I work back through the commercial part of the organization from that perspective to help pull that together? What's interesting is you can work with the brand people or the innovation people, but then do I have the right supply chain capabilities? Am I thinking about the packaging in the same way to ensure that it's not only delivering on my brand objective, but also that it doesn't create a logistical nightmare in a new environment from a supply chain point of view, so that you're not getting tax back from the retailer on how you're costing them more money through the solution. So I think in the case of search, it provides a really interesting point of view as you think about broader consumer insights, where before you might have had to go spend large research budgets to get just-in-time information, but really the data is right there in front of you.
No, I mean, it's a really interesting, and I think that there's a lot that we've learned about consumers as well. And, kind of what's important to them, whether it's, kind of from a packaging perspective, as you mentioned, right? And, sometimes not only kind of taking existing product and kind of putting two in a package with a new wrap. I mean, it's this idea of, right, the new SKU, it's a new product. And I think that the more that, right, I mean, and that's what's so interesting right now, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how it affects all of it. And if you think about search in general, and this is where kind of, as you mentioned, kind of the eventual migration or integration of these things is important. Because let's just take, s'mores for us, for example, which is a huge occasion, not to say that this is a top term. So please, those listening, don't look at this because I'm not going to pretend like it's something that everyone's looking for. But you might say something like, hey, what's a good summertime snack? Hershey s'mores should be trying to, think about how to win that occasion as people are searching at that, at a very high level. But as they search down from there and it gives the results, what comes next, right? So then it might be, recipes related to s'mores, and they could be the traditional s'mores with the great Hershey milk chocolate bar, et cetera. Maybe it's a different version that has a Reese cup, or maybe it's a spin on something that's a little bit different that opens something up. We had a customer, I think it was last summer, in a different market that created a whole different s'mores campaign with an insight that they had through search on a way to do it differently. I don't want to overshare, but it had strong engagement. It was just all about that one insight that you got from just kind of looking at some of the data. So going back to like kind of the holistic media and the strategy, again, there's multiple layers today that probably sit in different parts of the organization. How do you bring those together to cohesively, all advance towards one objective or one strategy?
So Brad, it's I was going to reach over and grab it because it's literally like right there, but somebody literally sent me a s'mores kit yesterday. So
awesome.
Maybe they were preparing for this, but it is quite funny in terms of this idea, because right, it goes back to like summer fun, right? I mean, it's what is that, and even from like a family perspective. So it is the timing of that was quite unique, but I do think that there's something to be said here, right, in terms of like branding, right? Because how do I think about, right, Hershey's, I mean, I think of it as a confection company, but is it a lifestyle company, right? I mean, and this kind of gives you the opportunity, right, to take a step back and think about what does it mean? I mean, to the consumer, it might already be lifestyle, right?
Yeah. Well, and some of the brands, obviously meet, they definitely meet consumer needs. In some cases, there's a very deep emotional connection with brands, right? You can tie them back to either parts of your childhood or different, lifestyle events you had. But the reality too is in many cases, these brands serve a job or they have a purpose. So as you think about occasions, what occasion or what job can my brand do or serve based on whatever that consumer need is. So in your case, you called it out. I'm looking for something fun to do for the summer. I'm stuck in my house. I can't leave the house. My family is driving me crazy. And I want to do something that's maybe a little different than what I normally do. Um, S'mores kit delivered to my house, all the ingredients. All I got to do is, create a fire pit outside. Maybe I do it on my grill. Maybe I do it inside. Maybe I live in a metropolitan area in an apartment and I'm really stuck there and I have to figure out a way to, take advantage of that inside. So think about the different kind of occasions and the jobs that brand can do in the different environments, the different creative messaging, all those things coming together in a way that helps that need be fulfilled.
So we have a lot of questions from the audience. So we're gonna turn our attention there. And we'll just start at the top of the list, Brad. Thank you so much. Have sales during this period led you to think about adjusting or realigning as you focus and move forward?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yes, have sales during this time period led you to think differently, and how will you realign and readjust as you move forward?
Yeah, it's a little bit of like a wave, to be candid with you. So, I mean, we had a very good start to the year. Then with COVID, things definitely accelerated. The good news for us is, our supply chain organization is best in class. I believe we had, 98.5% plus fill rates, whereas many companies weren't as fortunate to have it during that time. And if you think about the demand generation, one other interesting fact is that chocolate, through some of the research that we have, has been cited as the #1 comfort food or snack during this time as well. So it's one of those interesting dilemmas where, in a way where you would historically look at things maybe as a 4-week ROI or a short-term ROI, you have retailers that may have done a better job than some in terms of being in position to win the shopping trip. You've got brands that may have not been in stock or might maybe in a position to win, and you have shoppers that have needs. So it's a really interesting time to think about brand loyalty and brand acquisition. If I think back to the question, I kind of touched on a little bit in terms of the brand piece or the Hershey piece, but even from the retailer piece, the big four in this equation, which have been Walmart, Amazon, Target, and Kroger, have been investing in digital capabilities for years. And they look at this as a prime time now, right, to be in the best position to take away that market share from other folks. And in some cases, they might even be willing to lose a little money in the equation for the long-term benefit of getting that digital shopper, which we know is a more valuable shopper when you have a digital and physical, shopper who emulates that behavior. We kind of look at it in the same lens. That shopper that spends online actually has a higher basket for us. So if you're able to capture that physical and digital trip and have your brands win their fair share or more of the occasion or the need, then that's where you kind of build that long-lasting business and that brand loyalty that we're looking for. So I think we're, as a company, very pleased to see the performance that we've started to achieve through the digital acceleration and our readiness to that. And what we also see too as being a comfort snack and food, like people go back to what they know and love. One of the interesting categories that I saw recently that's seeing a little bit of a resurgence is soup. So for years, you've seen soup, be on the decline. We've seen some of the financial reporting back on a company like Campbell's and the struggles. Well, soup is now hot again. Like I've tried to pick up soup.
No pun intended.
Out of stock. Yeah, I've tried to pick up soup multiple times with it being out of stock. But what a great opportunity to drive and re-engage shoppers in your brands with a category that's been struggling and remind them of the benefits and the conveniences of your category. So I think that's kind of how we're trying to take a look at it, as more of this long-term play of that really strong brand and consumer engagement.
That's really helpful. This is a great question. Thank you, whoever asked it. How does Hershey's create a holistic digital strategy across retail and food service?
Digital strategy, retail, food service. So I would tell you, candidly, I think specifically even on the food service side of things, it's an opportunity. So we're talking a little bit more of that, traditional consumer portfolio as it relates to more of like the grocery channel, for example. But then you also have this other kind of emerging need in this kind of B2B segment of the business. Food service has struggled across the board for every company because as people went to fewer restaurants and were out more, obviously there's not that demand there. But I think from a food service perspective, again, if I think about the full sphere ecosystem of things, what a great time to connect people with some of our brands within the baking category, for example, and resonate with those, folks at home that are creating recipes. And then as they go out to restaurants and see those same brands and think about them in a different way or a new way, to bring that full circle. In terms of, more of the B2B relationship, you've got all these small ice cream shops, you've got all these small businesses, you've got office complexes, which we'll kind of see where that leads to over time, but you got break rooms, you got all these different, unique business opportunities. And you're starting to see, Amazon Business, for example, be one of those potential solutions where they're curating different packs and different ideas to help solve for those business needs. So I think as a company, whereas we maybe, approach food service in a more traditional sense, I think there's definitely an opportunity to service some of those smaller players, those emerging B2B players with different parts of portfolio and solutions that they may not be able to get through their current suppliers or that they're looking for and can't find.
Right, thank you. And then this is also really an interesting question, especially as you think about, I think some of the dollar channels and whatnot, but we had a question, curious about adjustments of size to meet optimal price points that vary each season, right? I assume the price points this season might be different than a year ago. I.e. s'more season has a $5 price point versus Halloween having a larger basket. But it goes back to almost this idea of kind of lifestyle and, kind of thinking about, the moment, right? What's important to consumers and what price point are they willing to spend on something that's truly a treat?
Yeah. Well, some of it comes down to fulfillment model too, right? So I think the one that's on a lot of people's minds, especially with Amazon being the largest player there, is ship to home. And, to pack and fulfill and ship a product isn't cheap. And that's why during this pandemic, I think a statistic I read, I'm not going to quote who it's from, because it's one of two people, but in essence, it was during this time period, not one grocery retailer opened up a ship to home capability. That was new. And that's because it's a more expensive route to go to market. So as part of that related back to portfolio, you have to say, well, I can't sell a $3 item when it costs me $7 to ship and fulfill it, right? I have to think about the portfolio a little bit differently. And to the previous commentary I made on basket building, that's part of the insight and equation we can bring back to the retailer, right? It's like, hey, I've developed a portfolio at this $15, $20 price point that still has value. It still resonates with the shopper and the consumer. But in order to continue to offset the fixed cost or the semi-variable fixed cost of the shipping and fulfillment, let's think about some other bundling ways we can drive that total basket up together, help make it a more efficient shipping model. And that's where you can really unlock the more solution-based conversation with them.
All right, we have many more questions, but we'll close it out with this one, Brad. Is how do you see the future of sales channels, wholesale versus retail, and how does Hershey's think about their own D2C channel?
To an extent, I think we covered it a little bit. I think you're going to see, we're going to see how ready and capable not only the suppliers are, but also the retailers are in this environment, right? I mean, let's face it, there's a number of companies, both in terms of wholesale retail as well as CPGs, that are maybe better leveraged than others in terms of financial flexibility and whatnot to be able to invest in some of these capabilities. And I think, as the larger players have a head start here, it'll be interesting to see how maybe some other emerging businesses evolve during this time frame. So Instacart and Shipt and some of those partners are helping stand up a lot of capabilities for some of these retailers. I'd imagine that, even on the wholesale side, if I'm a wholesaler, I'm trying to think about, hey, why should the retailers have all the fun? There's these marketplaces or these things, are there unique propositions that I could be engaging in and provide a value proposition that maybe isn't being defined by either the retailer or the supplier in that market to fulfill. And then in terms of D2C is a very interesting one. So I think it kind of depends on what your ultimate objective and strategy is for D2C. So I'll just use a very quick example within the Hershey company. we're probably not going to be the best priced or best way to go get a box of Hershey bars, right? There's probably going to be a better way to ship or fulfill or get a better price on that from somewhere else. But if you're looking to get a fresh from the factory, made in 2 weeks case with this, experience is like, I mean, you're not going to find that anywhere else. So I think if you're going to stand up D2C, you're going to have to think about that kind of unique value proposition that you can bring that will engage your shopper and consumer and bring them into your ecosystem. And it's that balance of how much demand generation or traffic generation am I going to get to my D2C site versus an Amazon that's got millions upon millions of people visiting there every day. I have to bring something kind of unique and differentiated to make that shopper and consumer want to visit my site, whether it's a branded site or whether it's D2C. I think as we move forward, it's kind of finding that unique value proposition that we can bring that kind of wants to make our shoppers engage our brands in a different way.
Great. Thank you, Brad, so much. What an incredible discussion. And for all of you on the line, we look forward to seeing you at our next conversation tomorrow at 10 a.m. To discuss home and home improvement in the supply chain in the current environment. As a reminder, all of our previous webinars are available on our website. We want to thank you, and Brad, most especially, thank you for all the insights and taking time out of your day for us.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.